Yekusiel, welcome back, buddy.
Good to be back.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you the formal intro. So, Yekusiel Eckstein is the founder of Kornerstone Media, a web development agency that specializes in custom software solutions. With a background in marketing, Yekusiel has worked with well over 100 businesses and organizations to elevate their brand. Lately, he's been focused on building custom software solutions for charity crowdfunding. Dude, it's good to have you back, man. How are you?
Yeah, likewise. It's just been working and grinding, but it's good to have another conversation.
Yeah, I've been watching. So, yeah, today I just want to talk about WordPress, man. So,
That's what I
I
often
know,
talk about too.
yeah. So, you start off as a good yeshiva bacher, and then you went into the technical world. So, talk to me about day one with WordPress, what appealed to you, and why you recommend it. Let's start there.
Great question. Actually, I wouldn't say that that for me, day one in WordPress, it wasn't something about WordPress that attracted me, and it wasn't something that I saw in it that made me want to recommend it or use it. That was the first when I started, getting into web design. WordPress was the first thing that was recommended to me by a friend. Um, I was first looking into Wix, and my friend was like, "Nah, man, don't waste your time. Start here." He gave me all the resources. He told me check out. He gave me a list of three things. He said, "You're going to check out WordPress. You're going to check out something called Divi, and you're going to check out DreamHost, which is the hosting company that I started out with." And
Right.
uh,
But
and
they
that's
have
just
their
the
own
first
they have
thing.
their own software solutions. So
Who?
DreamHost, like you can build your web like GoDaddy, like native builder.
Yeah, I found out way
Okay.
later, or maybe even came out way later. They have some sort. I think they call it the remixer, or unless maybe that's GoDaddy's builder. But they apparently do have some sort of builder. But I never even attempted to play with that. I went straight for Divi and all that. But as time went on, I indeed did find reasons to like WordPress and to want to recommend it. And I think the main reason for me is how much it gives you straight out of the box and has a really good like architecture just set up for storing data and having a user login system, for example. A lot of things that there would be absolutely no reason to build from scratch. It just gives you. And maybe there are other systems that offer that too, but it's just user friendly and it's possible to manage a WordPress website without any real coding experience. So for these reasons, I think it's a great marriage between like what's good for a developer and what will be good for the client as well.
Right. And just for the listeners, Divi is a custom builder within WordPress. So when he addresses Divi, he's actually referring to WordPress as well. Now, the thing about WordPress is you can have, two people can have wildly different experiences with the system. So the best way to look at WordPress for those who are listening and know a little bit about it is WordPress is essentially like an operating system. The technical term is a content management system, but really what it is just a set of tools out of the box that are created by open source. So there's a community of developers around the world who contribute, and it's pretty much the core toolbox is developed by really smart people, so you don't need to quote unquote reinvent the wheel. Now, what people who want to make money often do is they will build a theme on WordPress so they know that it's easily integratable because, as we know, 1/3 of the internet. So if you pick out a random website, there's a 33% chance that it's WordPress. So 1/3 of the internet is WordPress. So if you're going to build a theme and you want to find a way to make money, leveraging WordPress would be great. Now, here's my point. Some people who just have been exposed to WordPress through themes might have a wildly different experience to, let's just say, someone who builds a custom system using WordPress and building a custom theme, which is highly customizable. Now, one quick thing here, the thing about themes, just to talk about them really quickly, is they're absolutely great. And, how about this? Take to hyperbolize here, to take the extreme condition, let's even pull back to Wix. So Wix is amazing. It's super simple to use. You need absolutely no experience, and you can put up a website in 1 hour. So why isn't everyone using Wix? Now the thing is, when something is super simplistic, you're subject to the mercy of its simplicity. So if you're kind of, someone who's running a babysitting business out of your basement, it's great. You want to build something called an MVP, a minimal viable product. You want to test the waters. You want to test proof your concept with a low expense. Wix is great. The problem now is the second you need a modicum of uniqueness, the second you need a modicum of complexity, now you realize you kind of hit a ceiling here because the simplicity of Wix is now constraining you. So instead of building, the way you could look at it is it's not a long-term foundation. And you're going to find yourself, when you pick bad initial structures, you're going to find yourself in a repetitive cycle of, instead of building, you're tearing down and rebuilding. And that's always a lot of work. So now to pull that back to WordPress for a second, some of these themes can be very constraining. Obviously, if you're making a theme, you want to have the largest demographic possible, and you're going to have all these extra bells and whistles, and you're going to have all this extra overhead, and it turns into clutter. The analogy I'll give here is it's akin to ordering an 80-wheeler truck to deliver a pie of pizza. You have all this additional overhead. So you can see, I'll give the mic back to you, but essentially what you do is you build custom themes on WordPress. And I really wanted to make that dissociation for people who do have a prior experience with WordPress, because it's likely in the realm of themes.
Yes. So, and that's a relatively new development for me because I was using Divi for a long time, and I managed to make it work for many different websites. And I would venture to say that it's almost the best out there. I know you're a big fan of Elementor, which is, those
Yes.
are widely considered to be the two best, probably. And it was great for a very long time. But then, eventually you're going to hit, you're going to want a certain animation or a certain kind of module that Divi just doesn't happen to have. Now you're going to have to start figuring out how to build it yourself in a way that integrates well with Divi, and or whichever theme you're using, and I would even give Divi the credit, like they've gone, I'm sure Elementor has this too. They've gone as far as to give you the ability to create what they're calling a custom theme within Divi, which is a custom theme to an extent, but it's still using Divi, the Divi framework and the Divi tools. So what we began to do is build custom themes, which means that all the templates are built from scratch by us, both from the front end, both from the back end, and that gives us the full range and freedom to do whatever we want, to make it look however we want, to function however we want. And we're not reverse engineering something into something that exists. We have pretty much a blank canvas to work with. And it obviously takes more skill. And if you're just launching a web design business, you're probably not going to be doing this from day one. But with time, you'll notice that this approach is by far the most professional and will give you the best long-term results as well.
Right. Yeah, and it's not necessarily, there's not one solution for all problems. It's really contextualized. If someone comes up to you and they say, I want to buy a car, really, they say, what's the best car out there? That's a hard question to answer, because what's the context? Do you have a family of 8 kids, or are you trying to win a race, right? So, I might say the best car for you would be a van or a sports car or whatever it may be. And the point here is that sometimes you need that heavy complexity, and sometimes you need to get in and out quickly with simplicity. Now, my hesitations with Divi, and the reason why, and for listeners out there, I initially started with Divi, and I personally felt that the RAM allocation, meaning the moment you start adding a lot of stuff to a page, the Divi builders, and I know you mentioned that they fixed up a lot of it, but a lot of those builders, just so much clutter, and I had to give clients just custom resources on the server just to keep the website from crashing. Now, sometimes it would work when they actually load the website on the front end, but when they're in the back end and they enable the builder, it was absolute chaos. And image compression was kind of weird as well. And at the time, let's say it was about 2 years ago, I kind of felt it was a 50-50 match. They were really at a race between Divi and Elementor. And in my opinion, and I know, you can logically look at it the other way as well. It's kind of like a PC versus Mac thing. But in my opinion, I kind of felt Elementor won, and significantly, especially with recent updates with containers. They're a lot more lightweight. And the clutter issue is really kind of across the board with Divi and Elementor. But I felt that Elementor really had a strong edge, especially as of lately. Now, here's the thing, right? Just to take we're in the context of Divi versus Elementor, but when you take a step outwards and you're kind of looking at it from a higher perspective, from a bird's eye view, all these drag and drop builders, again, are constraining, and there's that engineering trade-off for performance versus ease of use. And a lot of times, even using your custom HTML or CSS, or having a hybrid. So as you mentioned, you can have Divi functioning, you can have Elementor functioning, And you can have the drag and drop, so even a client can go in and make adjustments if they need. And then certain pages that have custom structures, or certain elements within pages that have custom structures, you can create your own custom shortcode, and you can create your own custom HTML and kind of get the best of both worlds. So there's a spectrum here. And the first step is to properly assess what tools are best for this specific job. So across the board, I use Elementor because it just keeps jobs really simple and allows me to streamline and allows me to reuse code. But there are times where custom is really the way to go.
And we've had this conversation many times, Divi versus Elementor. I'll actually give you one. I'll tell you one thing I like about Elementor that I don't think I've seen in Divi so far. So they're much better with queries. Like I don't know if we want to get this conversation to get too advanced, but when you're querying data within a module, they do give you the ability to build a custom query, and they give you all the where conditions and the and conditions. So you're able to kind of Divi doesn't really have that, I don't think. So like in certain
Elementor,
ways,
you think Elementor doesn't have that, or Divi doesn't have
no,
that?
Divi does not. So that's something that Elementor has.
And even the Elementor, right? So you have custom
I mean, it's
posts and you
still
have custom fields, and you want to query by
exactly.
them,
Yeah,
right?
so I don't think Divi supports really natively supports custom fields. Like they don't have a great like people want to integrate advanced custom fields with Divi, and so far that hasn't been a thing. But what you just alluded
So
to,
hang on 1 second, because you're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about two different things which are important. So sometimes you have custom post types in WordPress, and you want to query those within your Divi. You're making the argument that Divi doesn't really have good native functionality for that, while
well
Elementor does.
they do have pretty good support for custom post types, but custom fields within a post.
Custom fields, right? Okay, and then you
Right,
pull in ACF. So
right.
ACF is this plugin that's pretty mainstream. And here's the thing about WordPress, just to not to sidetrack too much, but there are millions of plugins, and a lot of them are complete garbage. In fact, they're they're seen as backdoors for hackers. So we're gonna pull back to the Divi Elementor conversation in just a moment, but I do want to talk about plugins. So the thing about these plugins is that anyone in their basement can code a plugin, put it in the WordPress library, and you can download them. And when you choose plugins that aren't supported by a vibrant community with really good developers, they become huge security risks. And in particular, bad code within WordPress is an even bigger threat because don't forget, WordPress is open source, meaning the code is all online. You can go ahead, you can fork it, you can make your own version of WordPress. In fact, some people are doing that to make even more lightweight. And now the predictability is an element. So what you can have is these hackers can write scripts that just rattle doorknobs. They literally just go through IP address, and they make a certain type of request, and based on the response, they can tell if the website's WordPress. And that's what some of these hackers do. And this is why some of these WordPress sites get hacked, is because some of these hackers have a huge list of specific plugins, specific versions of plugins, and specific vulnerabilities. And as they start rattling doorknobs, they kind of have a basic script, something like, is this site WordPress? Great. Is this plugin active? Is this plugin active? Is this plugin active? Is this plugin active? And they find a plugin that has a vulnerability, and they go ahead and exploit your site at mass scale. So just to talk about plugins for a moment, but back to ACF. ACF is one of the biggest plugins out there for custom fields. So yeah, the fact that Divi is not supporting it is kind of crazy. But even within Elementor, just to kind of push back, and we've kind of switched sides here, where you're defending Elementor, and I'm kind of saying, hey, it's still not that great. Their queries are a little confusing, but they have integrations like Jet Engine, which is a suite of
Yes.
plugins that do help a lot of functionalities like listing grids and a lot of query types. So for the most part, and it is a little bit of clutter, but for the most part, it is a great solution to kind of getting everything out of Elementor.
Yeah, and also just to touch briefly on what you had alluded to just before about what I had told you about Divi improving. So what they're working on right now, which I don't know if you've been following, but they're on this massive journey now to release Divi 5. So they've been releasing
Yeah, I
4
heard.
point, whatever, ongoing for a while now. They actually took off about 2 years from developing any new features for Divi. They're like 90% of their development team started from scratch, and they rebuilt Divi from the ground up for Divi 5. So they had a small team that was just working on, putting out small releases, which are basically just bug fixes, but
Mm-hmm.
they completely started from the ground up. And one of the major improvements that they've done is that they removed shortcodes completely from. So for listeners, we're not talking about shortcodes that you could place within your within your page or whatnot to get something to show up. Or we're talking about the way that the Divi modules themselves are rendered. So everything used to be completely shortcode based, which was
Ah,
known to
which is
be really not good.
overhead. Right.
Yeah, and overhead and really not good for SEO either. That was a issue for a while, and I think that's one area where I don't think,
Why not? Sorry, why not good for SEO? Because it's dynamically rendered.
to be honest, I'm not even sure. That would be your world.
Oh,
But yeah,
okay.
there was something about it. I think Google just doesn't like excessive shortcodes, and maybe
Well,
that's why.
generally, what Google so generally what Google doesn't like and what WordPress does really well is so a lot of the JavaScript based websites that build sites dynamically because when you're loading a website through Ajax or asynchronous JavaScript and XML, the issue is that you get the first thing you get is a very lightweight response saying, "Hey, here's the full page," which is essentially empty, and then you have a bit of JavaScript in that initial response. But at that point, when the server says, "Hey, the website is done loading," thinks, "Oh, the website's done. This is something that's crawlable." But the truth is, when you're using JavaScript, it's a dynamic. It loads after the website's kind of given that response that it's fully loaded, and when the JavaScript is making requests back to the server to build certain sections of the page, Google doesn't know when that's done. There are ways of signaling to it, but that's the issue with Google, that a lot of these JavaScript based frameworks don't render well at all with Google. But what WordPress is PHP based. I mean, you can use JavaScript, but it's not rendering the full page with JavaScript. So when you say shortcodes, I'm not entirely sure. I haven't seen it, but that's generally the issue with
Yeah.
SEO with
Well, this
rendering.
has been a major criticism of Divi for a while, and they've completely gotten rid of that. They have a new API now. They're also going to be, will make it really easy to, yeah. So there, it looks, and the speed. They did release like a pre-version to play with, and the speed is dramatically improved. So that'll be interesting. But again, like as you mentioned, I'm past that. We're doing custom, and when talking about, I want to take that a step further. So it's not just about themes. It's also about, you mentioned plugins and the security risks that come with plugins and using plugins that you're not 100% sure of the source. So, you know, third-party plugins is something that we've moved away from also to a large degree. Now, when you talk about something like ACF that we just mentioned, massive plugins that obviously would be tremendous to build, and there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. And these are also generally plugins that are coming from trusted sources. But it would be very rare that we would use a third-party plugin for, just a small feature or a basic, even a essential feature of the website. But if it's something that, we could do in a matter of days or weeks, it's something we'll do ourselves.
Right. It's an engineering trade-off, right? So you don't always want to reinvent the wheel, and if there's well-supported plugins, but you really want to keep those plugins to as minimal as possible, and you want to make
Exactly.
sure they're all updated. And that's the thing about WordPress. Again, let's talk about that engineering trade-off for just a second. It's this amazing backend, this custom management system that allows you to separate content from structure, which allows your clients to add content, make orders, add stuff to page, but they're not bleeding into the territory of the custom structures you're making. It's that separation that's amazing. But the problem with that separation is there's a lot of database chaining. So the content's not coming from pages, it's coming from the database. And every time you load a page, there's an insane amount of database chaining. And this is where cache is not necessarily a solution to everything. Cache is an optimization feature. So, you can do object cache and you can reduce the amount of database chaining. But still, nevertheless, that's the biggest problem with WordPress. Is structurally, from a fundamental perspective, there, performance kind of tapers off pretty quickly when you're doing a lot of complexity, or especially when that database gets cluttered. So the goal here is that using really smart tools, having good protocols, and doing good maintenance right out of the box. And it's kind of why I spent a lot of time building plugins, custom
Yeah.
plugin for our internal company. So
Hmm.
for all our websites, we have these optimization tools that work directly with our server that check if certain structures are enabled. And instead of spending 45 minutes checking if everything's going good, it takes me about 3 minutes now. So yes, keeping WordPress healthy is
Yeah.
absolutely essential for long
And
term.
also, like, it cannot be understated the importance of a smartly structured database and correct querying. A cache will only do you so much. You know, querying parts of a table that you don't need, for example, or
Right.
there are 1,000 examples of just, and these are things you just learn with time, you know, and sometimes, you could just have a bunch of tables when you only really need one,
Right.
or there's so many different ways of just so understanding the WordPress structure and what it does and how it works and the order in which things load. All these things are will affect how your website runs.
Correct. Just because something works doesn't mean it's done smartly
Right,
whatsoever.
and that's what you're talking about. These plugins, like you don't know what you're getting. It's not only about security. It's like sometimes plugins just
You
aren't
got a
doing things
90-wheeler truck and you just need two or three features, and it's just
exactly.
all this. You're importing
Yeah,
a ton of PHP files and a ton of scripts just for 1 or 2% of the actual
exactly. That
structure that
that's
you
actually
need.
why I like building custom plugins even more than the security, which is obviously super important. But sometimes I just go into these plugins and I see just the amount of code that's there, and I'm like, surely this isn't all necessary for what I'm trying to
Correct.
do. So
Correct. Correct. Now, and exactly it. So, if you're thinking long term, if you want to make a company that scales, that you find success, the more you plan initially, the better you'll be. And sometimes even getting a website up, but doing it sleazy just works. The client's happy, you get the job done. But then you run into a million issues as you go down the line, and then you've done 50 websites this way. And then now, in order to make 51 websites, you're bogged down because you have all these 50 people complaining that there's issues every single week, right? And that becomes a scalability issue because you really can't move to 100 and you can't move to 200 and you can't move to 1,000. So, you learn over time, but then you kind of find yourself going through this cycle where it's a little bit exhausting at first. So you go back to all your previous sites and you start doing certain optimizations and you start adding certain tools and scalability factors. But eventually you find that sweet spot where you're applying minimal energy to the sites you've done in the past. And your attention span is constantly focused on pushing forward, not maintaining your current structures. And this bleeds into even server administration, not just web development, but setting up servers. Yeah, it's all a fascinating world of scalability.
what is your favorite part of WordPress
Uh,
or
I mean,
thing
I love
about
the
WordPress?
fact that I love the fact that I've got a complete separation of content and structure. I
Mm-hmm.
love the fact that I can make skeleton structures that we reuse across all our sites. So every client that needs a certain job, we're 65% reusing, and that last bit is purely designed to give the client the most unique experience for their specific task and specific job. I love that I can get in and out fast. It's extremely helpful, and I also love that there's such a vibrant community. So WordPress is extremely well supported. What I don't like about it is the fact that it is so well supported and it is open source is a double-edged sword, because security done right is very secure, but if you're not focused on keeping it healthy, it becomes an extreme vulnerability, given that the hackers who are trying to hack these sites know exactly what code and what pages they're aiming for. It's very, very predictable because it's open source. So what makes it an extremely powerful tool is also its greatest vulnerability, and consciously putting effort to make the most of it is truly important. Yeah. But we also build servers that are customized for WordPress. So it's this giant, everything is kind of nested together. Our server from the ground up is designed for WordPress. We're using a caching system that is not only a CDN, a content delivery network, not only is it a caching system, but it's also the PHP parser. So we use Lightspeed as well, and it gives us a lot of control. So it's an experience, and it's constantly becoming better as new technologies are out. So yeah, it's a great tool. It really makes making money, making websites possible.
Sure. How would you say you learned most of your server knowledge? All that server administration stuff and all the pieces, that go behind WordPress, all the loading and all the different
Right.
steps and how to optimize all of that. Where do you say all that knowledge came from, and like how deep into your experience of building websites did that all come?
So it's not a black and white. It's a gradation, and like all learning curves, and all areas of growth, you divide and conquer. So you take this big problem, you break it into these isolated single tasks, and you just break them. You just tackle one by one. So that mentality is translated into where I first started just making websites. And then I kind of started seeing how I'm using external parties to do hosting. And then I optimize certain sections or whatever control I do have on that server to kind of do my own thing. And then I'm inching outwards to the point where I make this big transition to my own servers, which is where we are today. So and that concept trickles out to really how I operate as a business person. It's all, you never want to get too complacent with where you are. Just because something works doesn't mean it's the best, especially in the tech world where, you just learn one language and it's almost obsolete and you got to move to the next. So it's a mix between having a good mentality to solve problems, divide and conquer, and actually having constantly a hungry mentality to never stay complacent and push forward. And to allow that concept to even apply to the bigger picture of what services you offer, I think is really, as a generic answer, that would be it.
What do you think is the next thing that that you feel, you talk about not becoming complacent. So what do you think might be the next area where you think you might need to improve or scale up or
I think
bring
it's
in a new
more
service?
marketing and sales. It's a competitive landscape, especially with hosting, and we don't necessarily market hosting. We work with notable entities, and we do a very unique set of work. And just a part of what we do is websites. I don't necessarily market hosting because it's not like sexy. It's not something you want to sell. But it's a fundamental service. And then web development as well. I kind of found a lot more success doing web development outside of the technical e-commerce industry and working with notable entities like public figures, people who need a certain sense of representation, working with knowledge panels. So it's a bit of a different demographic than the typical person. And I would say the next step, it's a very good question. My next step is really going to be more leveraging websites for effective marketing. So I'm heading towards something called Google's Knowledge Graph and knowledge panels. We've been doing those for years and we're experts in making them. But now we're going to really start coupling knowledge panels with web development. So that's probably my next immediate step.
So how so? Do you mean you'll sell as a package where someone gets a
Well,
website?
yeah. It'll be more. We'll be marketing knowledge panels more, and then by association, we'll be making a lot more websites. But having a website set up correctly that properly signals to Google that hey, there's a notable entity, there's a public figure, an entrepreneur, investor, singer, actor, whoever it may be, and this is their defined entity home. So this is a trusted source where Google can go and say, hey, this is a person. These are their defining attributes, and even all their coverage and all their IMDb and whatnot is kind of a central home, so Google can have an effective ability to web outwards. And if it finds external links and matching unique attributes, it can make that association that it's the same person. And this includes having effective something called schema objects. So these are JSON linked data objects that are in pages that tell Google that, hey, there's a person here, there's an album here, there's a song here, or there's a book here. And that affects something called level zero results. So, when you type in someone's name on Google and you see the first 10 results, that's page one. But what comes before those, like on Wikipedia, if you were to type in Matt Damon or whoever it is, and you see all those attributes on the right side, essentially being pulled from Wikipedia, that's data being pulled from Google's knowledge graph. And that's what we specialize in. And having an effective entity home in a website goes hand in hand with creating a stable knowledge panel. So it's a bit, it's a little bit outside of most people's demographic, but people who are in the notable entity or the public figure space greatly understand the value of having a knowledge panel.
Sure. How'd you get into that?
Oh, it's a good question. So, started working with,
You did work web design came first, right?
yeah, web design came first, then came hosting. Then I really was thrown into the public figure space. I worked with someone named Ryan Serhan for $1 Million Listing. He was the first high profile client I worked for. It was about quite a few years ago. Right around Sell It Like Serhan, where he had a book. Now, yeah, and I kind of realized how much more effective my skills can be outside of the tech world. And my uniqueness factor is compounded in that area. And I think from there, I kind of gravitated towards the real estate industry, and then I kind of gravitated towards the public figure space. So that's
So what
kind of,
keeps you like motivated to build websites when like because they're kind of like even though they're sort of related in a sense, but they're really different.
it's
I don't
leverage.
even see them as like the same person, same personality type being like attracted to both business models. You know what I mean? They seem like
Right.
different. So what keeps you motivated to do like both?
So I'm in a pretty happy place with web development. I'm not hyper focused on advancing my skills in that area in the sense that I am a programmer. I do program all day, but I'm programming custom tools now. I'm programming tools for a company called Scale My Publication that builds news outlets. I'm creating plugins, custom structures so we can scale out our services. I'm not necessarily hyper focused on building websites for individuals. Although it certainly is a priority to some extent, where it's a whole separate division. Hexatiger is a software development company, and we do build websites full time. But I'm constantly moving my attention to pockets of areas where I see a little bit of opportunity. Spend 3-4 months, kind of stabilize that, then move to a different area. I'm currently not super focused on web development, but it's an extremely and it's an irreplaceable tool at my disposal to effectively grow in every other aspect of what I do. So being a programmer, thinking like a programmer,
Yeah,
understanding how
kind of pulls
websites work,
everything together.
it pulls everything together. Yeah. How about you? What's your 5-year plan?
That's a great question. So I actually I did something funny a couple weeks ago. I built a React Native app for the first time.
There you go. JavaScript.
I haven't even ever done anything or even really studied React or
Wait, a
Node.js.
web app like an iOS Android app
Yeah, and
or a
not a
website?
web app, an actual mobile app.
Okay, cool. So
That's what
you
I'm saying,
have that
React
like
Native.
JavaScript layer that exports to iOS and Android respectively, right?
Yeah, so
Got it.
used a tool called Expo, which I don't know all the terminology yet because I'm still learning. That was my first time. I just woke up one morning and said, I think today's going to be the day that I'm going to build an app. And I spent a couple hours and I built a simple application. And it was fun. And I kind of see myself maybe getting a little bit more into the app space.
It is fun.
But we'll see. I'm still kind of toying with that idea. I have already a little bit of experience like building like custom CRM type platforms, and actually have been using WordPress as like a backend for it. So that still kind of fits. It's not as much web design as it is web development. I do find more fulfillment in development projects. Projects that focus more on building tools and like it's more about what's happening below the hood,
Right.
rather than something that just looks pretty. Even though I love rolling out a nice looking website, that always feels good. So I plan to keep doing that. But I really do want to move a little bit more into like software development and and apps as well. So
Yeah, the learning curve should never end. That's the honest truth.
absolutely, yeah,
And yeah, and it's great you see WordPress is even even if there's no front end, it's a great place to
yeah,
store data, to organize data, to distribute data, to build APIs on. Yeah, you name it.
yeah. So that's what I think. And then I speak to other developers to tell me like you're about 30 seconds from not using WordPress. You should probably look into Laravel.
Yeah, everyone has their own opinion. I mean, Laravel doesn't have such a vibrant community. It's kind of tapered off over the years, but really, that's exactly why you should always get multiple opinions. Because when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And when someone is only comfortable using, X structure, they're always going to recommend X structure, right? So I highly recommend you get a second. It's like going to a doctor. You want to get 2 or 3 opinions, and you also want to get unbiased opinions. Someone's trying to close a job and make money. They're going to recommend what they can do, right? But it might not. They're going to recommend what they're best at. They might not recommend what's best for you. So yeah, I'm sure there are people talking about WordPress, and I'm gonna be pushing WordPress because WordPress works for me. It doesn't necessarily mean
Yeah,
that WordPress is the best solution.
yeah. So for now, like I kind of feel the same way. Like I'm not saying there isn't a point to be made. Potentially, it's kind of like your analogy that I've heard from you several times already with using the big truck to get through a small entranceway, or for a small job that you don't need it for. Um, in certain cases, maybe even WordPress as a whole could be looked at that versus using maybe something like Laravel, which could be a lot more lightweight potentially. Like
Yeah,
there's a
it's
lot like it's
WordPress is truly not ideal with a lot of data. So when you
right,
have millions of database entries, WordPress is extremely inefficient due to the database
exactly.
chaining issue that's inherently there. Yeah.
So there's definitely a point to be made about that. But that being said, I've not yet reached the point where I saw a real tangible problem, So maybe the softwares that I built were for companies that simply don't have that much data or haven't yet reached that amount of data. This is probably something that I'm going to learn. It might be something that comes to smack me in the face in a little while. That like, hey, I just put all this effort into building something in WordPress, and that's just not going to scale past a certain point. Maybe, but that's all about learning, And
It's all about engineering and having a good initial condition and making a good, healthy decision from the start that even anticipates where you might be with growth, right?
yeah. Have
Good
you
stuff.
ever done any research into like more of like a React Node.js type setup instead of
I
like
mean,
the Divi world?
I built apps in my early days quite a bit. I'm proficient in Java. It's really my
Hmm.
comfort zone. but we use PHP because that's just what runs the internet for the most part.
Yeah,
Use JavaScript-based frameworks, but I'm thinking purely from an economical perspective and in terms of what my business model entails, and getting in and out with WordPress is the way to go. Sure, you can make a JavaScript framework, a React Native or Node.js website that loads way faster, and I've even seen benchmarks that show that it is way faster. But then you're reinventing the wheel. Good luck making a backend. You're gonna spend six
exactly.
months building a custom backend where you have engineers who've got together and made something that's extremely robust and detailed and just years and years of building on. So, you know, you really need to have a good reason to move to React Native or Node.js when you're looking to build a website. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of like when people call me and like, they're feeling the way around, they're looking for a website, they're not sure what to do. So a lot of them ask me about Wix, and I actually don't like necessarily tell people don't do it. I ask them what their needs are, and it's like you said, if it's a kind of a business that like they truly need something extremely simple and they couldn't possibly see themselves scaling to a point where they're going to need something more, then I'm like, yeah, maybe you don't need to spend too much money right now, and it's not like the end of the world if you need to rebuild something down the line. But if there's even just like a possibility that they might need to like have something bigger than what Wix is going to offer them, I tell them you should do it right the first time. And it's kind of the same thing with, I think, with WordPress versus something with like a JavaScript framework and a Node backend. I think it's kind of the same thing where you got to know what your needs are, and
Correct. Correct.
if you have that need, if it's a really really complex application which could also have a lot of data, something like that could really be a big monster, it might be worth making the investment and really and
100%.
reinventing the wheel. But
And
for
clients who
90% of customers, it's not. It's just not.
Right. And on my end, for clients who need something that's not WordPress, where an ideal recommendation would be off WordPress, they're not an ideal client. I
Okay.
generally, for websites, I keep it to notable entities. I keep it in and out, short and sweet. I do build quite a few e-commerce sites, but it's not generally what I'm actively looking for.
Hmm.
All right, Yekusiel, I think we are running out of time.
Yeah, this has been fun.
It's always good catching up with you, buddy.
Absolutely. Looking forward to next time.
You too.